Before we get started with the show, here's a quick word from our sponsor, Global Training Center. As trade compliance professionals, you want to make sure that your procedures and documentation are completed as correctly as possible to avoid any delays and possible fines. We provide a range of trade compliance courses that will fit your needs. From in-person or web training to recorded on-demand courses, we can train one or even thousands on your team through your learning platform or on our portal. We can even customize a private session for your team. Go to globaltrainingcenter.com to find out more.
For all you folks out there trying your best to cross the T's and dot the I's, how do you know what somebody's providing you regarding your vendors or even within your own company, what you're buying from, who you're buying from, and all that is completely legitimate or done with the most ethical measures or not? So I don't know. Lala, I'm looking forward to this discussion. How about yourself?
Well, so I've been wanting to do this episode for a while now, and I'm glad that we finally were able to come together and do this, only because we've had a very wide range of topics regarding forced labor. We've covered the basics. In fact, our very first, I think our second and third episodes ever were with Anna and Amy Morgan talking about just the law, the regulations, what you need to worry about. What does presumptive,
the use of AI in this whole mess, because there's so much information.
Yeah, we had AI. We talked about the law. We had some attorneys come on, and they talked about the legal matters and everything from software to the law and everything. But what we haven't had, and I'm really excited because of this one, like you said, Andy, is because now we're getting into like the science. I mean, and again, I lean more, and my brain, I guess, goes more towards that part of the discussions. And like, I really like the science and the technology, et cetera, that comes with something like this, because I remember watching, this is going to sound goofy, but I remember watching like crime scene shows back like 10, 15 years ago. And apparently they did stuff like this, but we know it's not really true. But so now it's a lot more available, which is really cool, where you can literally do what is called isotopic testing on items or materials or products, you name it, where it tells you exactly where that came from. And Andy, you and I have talked about this before. Is like, we always use the classic example of that T-shirt, that famous T-shirt that came into the U.S. and it's made out of cotton. Well, now they do cotton blends. All right, so they have cotton blends. God knows, I mean, many different farms all over the world that they use their own special blend, kind of like your own special cocktail. You know, it's you put a little bit of this and this and that, and that's the perfect cocktail. That's your signature cocktail. Same thing with a blend of cotton or fabric. I blended all these different types of cotton, and now I made the perfect material, you know, but so now what? You know, it is how much of it was forced labor, how much of it was not, or was any of it forced labor or not. So anyway, so now we're going to get into that. And I'm really excited about that, because we finally managed to get a company by the name of Oritain. And we have Mr. Ben Tompkins, who's right now in DC, but they're a global company. And we were introduced to them by the one and only Ana Hinojosa, again, because she was she's been around this for since the beginning of forced labor and talking, or even before that, of course, you know, but she's our go-to forced labor person. So, but anyway, Andy, I don't know if you want to bring them in, and then we'll start the conversation.
Well, Anna, it's like you were on recently, and this is a follow-up to this, but as we've talked through, it's really with the forced labor and trying to figure out what's going on. There's one issue. It's kind of like the old NAFTA certificates, like country of origin, here it is. And then you had these blanket forms. How valid really was it and all that? Well, now we're into a world that has moved beyond forms and even beyond data from just, you know, filling out a form and it becomes data. It's like going into utilizing science as well as artificial intelligence to keep up with all this. it can be overwhelming. And looking at it. So in our discussion on it, I mean, I would love for you to, where are we today on things? I mean, everybody can talk about the laws and everything, and let's get practical in today's world. What do I do? Who should I use? What questions should I be asking of people?
Yeah, well, thank you again, Andy and Lalo, for inviting me and Oritain to be on your podcast. It's always a pleasure to be here. I think that the trade community has seen that forced labor enforcement and really a lot of the due diligence requirements that are popping up around the world are really expecting people who are engaged in international trade to do more. There's an expectation that there's a very deep understanding of the supply chain, a very high level of expectation with regards to full transparency and full traceability of what goes into your products. There's always been some level of requirement for certain sensitive products like medicines or health related products. And so people who were either developing drugs or things that were going to be ingested or put inside people's bodies, those companies understood the importance of that level of transparency. But for most other consumer products, the importers were not quite expecting that they needed that level. But I think the changes in forced labor regulations and other due diligence regulations that are emerging around the world have kind of forced the issue. And now you have to know where your products are made, what goes into your products, and who's involved in the manufacturing process all along the way. And some people have commented to me in particular, the government can't possibly expect me to be able to trace my raw materials back to the farm. The reality is, yes, they do expect it. And if you can't, unfortunately, the way several laws are written, the obligation is on the importer of record. And as the importer of record who's trying to bring in foreign products into the U.S., you're liable for ensuring that you're compliant with all of the laws, rules, and regulations.
Anna, you're hitting on a key point because this is where we keep going back. And matter of fact, you and Amy, when we were initially talking about going through these things, when you have a shipment arrive at a port and you're going through the process and customs is looking at it as saying, you need to prove this was not manufactured with forced labor, at that point is way too late to start pulling this information together. And we said at the time, you need to start, again, vetting your suppliers, vetting your products, literally verifying their processes and where it's coming from and going and putting boots on the ground, if you will, at the origins and all that. Well, even in today's world now, there's more efficient ways of verifying or validating information. And I think that's where you're alluding to here with Oritain and companies like that is doing the testing, I guess, is where we're getting at, which doing a test on a product is probably much more cost effective, even though I'm sure it's not the cheapest thing in the world, than spending dollars and going flying halfway around the world to verify certain things, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to understand the role. Like you said, your conversation started with certificates of origin. Unfortunately, the actions of many fraudulent people have invalidated the value of certificates of origin, and now there's a real need for some objective verification about the claims that companies are making. And there's no better way than to have an objective forensic test that confirms whether there is or isn't any prohibited material in your imported product. Why don't we hear from Ben?
Absolutely. That's it. Well, thank you so much for having us. And you pronounce Oritain perfectly. Sometimes people trip over that. I think it originally comes from origin certain, So that's what we provide, is sort of certainty around the origin of key commodities. And obviously we work very closely now within sort of the apparel and home textile sector. So yeah, I apologize that you've had to downgrade from Amy Morgan when recently joined with Anna, but really pleased to be part of today's discussion. And absolutely, I think to the points you're just mentioning there, at least as we sit, particularly in relation to some of the regulations that have come into place, it's really a three-legged chair that we're trying to support. Have to be able to provide guidance on sort of point to point in the supply chain. That's where a lot of those mapping tools come into play. You then have a need to be able to ensure that there is no financial nexus within your supply chain to sort of a banned entity or prohibited entity. That's where some of the AI tools come into play. And then the third and final component, which appreciate I'm coming from a slightly biased perspective here, but it's becoming more and more pertinent, is around the material verification. And unfortunately, you can have all the documentation in place, all of the certificates of origin, bills of lading, mapping in place, but that doesn't necessarily guarantee the origin of the material that's actually gone into those goods. So a level of forensic testing is needed, and happy to delve into a little bit around the science, although I will caveat, I am not a scientist nor a statistician, but happy to give a little bit of an overview there.
All right. So with what you've got, let me ask this question. The services in general here we're talking about is, let's pick a scenario, Anna, that as we're going through, what is it that this type of service is, what should I be looking at? Where is this going to fill the void that I have right now?
Well, I think that's a great question, because certainly from the area of forced labor, it's a very strong tool to have, to be able to incorporate forensic testing into your risk management and due diligence efforts. That's for sure. But there are a lot of other reasons for wanting to make sure that what is actually going into your product is what you contracted to go into your product. You may have requested that, we'll speak about cotton, that raw cotton from a certain country, because you're trying to meet maybe other sustainability goals or other requirements that your investors may have in what types of raw materials you put into your product. And so you've contracted with the manufacturer expecting that those are the fibers that go into your product. And then when it's tested, and only through testing do you find that maybe the right fiber composition isn't there, or that the fibers that are included are fibers that are not what you paid for, whether it's that they come from a lower quality production or harvest, or that it comes from a prohibited area that are then going to bring compliance consequences to you as an importer.
Okay. So for right now, we've been using, if you will, fashion somewhat, the garments type thing. Is that what we need to be focused on initially here, or are there other products that we would be looking at doing testing on?
Let Ben answer that, because I think he's got a lot of more of the specifics of what some of Oritain's clients are focusing on.
Yeah, so a large part of that is within the fashion industry, but I think, especially as we're sort of relating it back to current regulations, if you look at the UFLPA, the particular one of the key commodities that's affected in the sort of the realm that we deal within is cotton, and so that's not just specifically for what's going to end up within the fashion and apparel market. Interestingly, one of the big catalysts for Oritain in sort of branching out into the fiber sort of world was really around home textiles as well. That's a significant area of the industry to look into, whether that's sort of blanketed and covered within fashion as well. But then you have other uses of cotton. It could be in cotton gauze, it could be in medical products, it could be used in the automotive sector. And interestingly, as it pertains, and I'll be careful not to step outside of my circle of competence, but under the UFLPA and the presumption there is that if it's any part of the good made in whole or in part with forced labor, so it doesn't matter if it's part of the material, 100% of the material, it can still be banned from import into the United States. And so, yes, there's been a lot of focus on the apparel and textile market, but there's other use cases within cotton. And then outside of cotton, we also work within other materials as well, whether it be strong wool and merino wool. We work in cashmere, mohair, where there can be issues around the degradation of land. There could be animal welfare practice issues. One of the big ones in wool was around mulesing. So there was sort of a banning of mulesing, which is sort of a procedure in which the animal has their tail clipped to sort of protect from any diseases, which is a pretty bad practice. And it was banned within New Zealand. So you knew that if you were sourcing wool from New Zealand, that it didn't contain mulesing, and therefore you had better practices from an animal welfare. So I appreciate going a little bit off tangent there, but yeah, origin is not only important from a risk and compliance perspective, but there can be other really valuable insights that you can gain, whether it's through verifying the fact that, yes, I'm paying a premium for this particular cotton and getting that. That's important for importers to know, whether it's from a forced labor perspective or other use cases as well.
Ben, you just hit on something, though, I think that is really important. So folks, to our listeners, we keep talking about trying to verify, commodities for forced labor protection in scenarios like that. But at the same time, the other thing you just touched on would be you're paying a premium for a good quality, product. And the question is, are you getting what they said they were going to sell? That comes back to your purchasing group. That comes back to also potentially, from your legal department, that if somebody is not complying with the rules and whatnot or terms of the contract and whatnot. So this would be one of those areas that, in a positive manner, the compliance could reach out to other areas to say, are we getting what we're paying for kind of scenario there. So I think that is fantastic.
Yeah. Imagine some of the liability consequences on a brand that is selling what they believe to be, let's say, 100% Egyptian cotton towels. But when they're tested, not only are they not 100% cotton, but they may contain cotton from other countries that are not as desirable because the consumer is purchasing based on the label that's on that product, and they paid extra to have this 100% Egyptian cotton or 100% whatever kind of cotton. But if it's not that, then the consumer's being defrauded. The importer is being defrauded by their manufacturer and incurring a liability for false advertisement and for selling something that isn't what they're promoting that they're selling. So it's really important to trust but verify that what your manufacturer is saying they're giving you is actually what you're receiving.
What I feel is interesting, Anna, is that we recently did a training for forced labor, but aside from that, we also included supply chain traceability. And what we saw, we cited a report that an independent group went and pulled 800 and some odd products from retail shelves, pulled them and tested them, and found that a lot of them were made through forced labor and not what they claimed. Not only that, but I think it was like something like 30% of them were actually, flagged as non-originating, like not what they said they were. But of those products, I believe like 19% of those people or manufacturers were saying they're 100% American, and so they don't even know what they're buying or how they're blending items. They didn't really, I think the report might say, and I'll include it in the show notes because it's a very interesting report actually, how it cites things like that. But you're 100% right on that, in saying that.
I was going to say some of the other areas that are big compliance areas with regards to origin are free trade agreement compliance. So people are claiming benefits under special free trade agreements that the U.S. may have with other countries. And in most cases, those have fiber forward or yarn forward requirements in order to take advantage of those benefits. And there's substitutions in those places. So really, having the ability to verify that the claims of your manufacturer are accurate can be that insurance policy for you, that you are able to demonstrate that you're exercising due diligence or reasonable care in making sure that your goods are compliant, but also that you are, for your investors, that you are addressing the risk management and not just trusting, but actually also verifying through some objective way that what's going into the product is accurate.
I was thinking the very thing of what you just said is what came to mind was with the U.S. Canadian Mexican agreement. North American content is supposed to be 75% of the product. This would be a good way and a much, again, I have to say on the surface, it sounds like a much more cost-effective way to verify it and validate that, in fact, you are complying with the trade agreement. But Ben, you started to say something.
It's a great point to make, and I won't, nor are we able to, but there's been a lot of guidance around how origin testing could be utilized, not only from a forced labor and compliance perspective, but also to enforce sort of trade and tariff issues as well. And I think that's going to become really important, especially with a lot of talk around that with the new administration as well. But where we see a lot of value is not only through use of isotopic testing, you have the detection of maybe nefarious or non-compliant behavior. But one of the largest impacts that we found is empowering our clients, brands, retailers, manufacturers, a whole array of importers of record, to empower them to communicate to their supplier base that, hey, look, I have the ability to test, and I'm going to be testing on sort of risk-based, ongoing, proactive process. That is a huge deterrent to non-compliant behavior in the first instance as well. And if you're sort of testing upstream, testing proactively, you're mitigating the risk of sort of contamination or nefarious activity within the supply chain, and you can actively identify and remediate some of those issues as well before that product then goes through the manufacturing process. Which is an interesting point as well. But the point around tariffs is a topical one.
All right. So we've established that this would be a good way to validate, verify information in your product, do due diligence, whether you're looking at from a compliance standpoint on forced labor to, validating, are you getting what you're paying for and all that. So, all right, I'm a compliance person. I'm going, okay, I need to do the testing. Now what? I'm like, I want to look at doing this with Oritain. What's my process here?
It's a great plug, Andy. No, it's a great question. And so we really try to understand our clients. We go through quite a vast sort of consultative process with them. We try to get a better understanding of their supply chain. And that really gives us the ability to work internally. We've got a great team of sort of solutions architects and teams in-house that sort of design bespoke programs using sort of best-in-class practice and experience. I think what we look to then do with that information is sort of provide a recommendation and a testing program that is risk-based, it's targeted. We look to test at specific points in the supply chain where there's going to be efficiency. So, for example, testing at a fabric level becomes really important. It's late enough in the production process that you know that the fabric is designated for your purposes, but you can also correct and remediate issues before that product then gets on water. So we sort of go through that fact-finding process. We try to understand potential exposure to higher risk countries where there might be a larger prevalence of this cotton in place, and then look to put together sort of a programmatic testing program that might be seasonal, it might be quarterly, very much dependent upon their production cycle as well. So that's sort of the initial process. And as part of that, we also engage a lot of the time with general counsels, compliance, merchandise, because it really does touch a number of different points within the business and can have different values to different people as well.
I love where you're going with that. And I was going to say, okay, with all due respect, I was going, all right, pull back up a little bit. because here I am. I want to do it. So first off, you help confirm this isn't a case where I'm like, okay, I've got a shipment in a port. It's been hung up. Let me just pick up the phone and say, hey guys, can you test this real quick? This is something that would take some forethought, some planning, and approach it more from, I guess, from the sound of it, more of like a project to initialize a roundtable discussion, probably with several departments, yourself or your company, and then to zero in on the opportunities, but then secondly, to identify what it is as a company I need to try and accomplish. What is it I need to validate? What may be urgent versus what is more longer term? Would that be a good synopsis?
Yeah, there could definitely be some short-term Friday afternoon calls that we get where the house is on fire and we need to put this out. But you don't sort of buy house insurance after that fire's occurred. You try to be proactive within that. So we definitely try to shift the conversation to being a far more proactive provider. We want to mitigate the risk of those Friday afternoon phone calls when there's sort of panic alarms and panic stations. We want to be as proactive and upstream in the supply chain as we can. So yes, sometimes it can be tackling both the short-term need and then looking at what a longer-term project will look like. But we definitely prefer to be in more of the proactive side of things.
So if I were going to, go ahead, Lalo.
Real quick, Ben. So, but as you do more and more and more tests, is it a lot like, and I hate to use this because I know sometimes some scientists don't really like, but in layman's terms, just to put it in layman's terms for, like when you do DNA testing, you already have samples of millions and millions of people as opposed to back when DNA testing started a few years or decades, like a few decades ago, right? So because of that, does it make it easier? Because I did read up on your page, and again, I'm going to include that on the show notes. It's very interesting how you all have this origin fingerprint, let's call it, where will it show up on some testing where it says, oh, I don't even need to go far back anymore because I already know where this is from? You know, what is that making it easier for you so that maybe you could turn off some of those fires, like you said, some of those Friday night fires, and maybe get to something a lot quicker? Is that, and I don't want to simplify it and say, no, it's easy. I will throw it into this thing, explode it, and then figure out the part. I'm not trying to simplify it that way, but I'm just trying to say, is a process making it and the mapping for you all making it that much more complete, let's call it, you know? Because I mean, I know, like, again, back to my reference of these crime shows, they can find who you are by picking up like a piece of your DNA, because some of your relatives may have already done DNA testing, and somehow they do this backwards DNA and they find that you were definitely the one that did this crime or whatnot, you know? So anyway, but I'm just kind of trying to compare it to how you do your product origin fingerprints.
Yeah, I'm happy to pick this one up. So luckily, if we were to start fresh from today and someone was turn around to us and go, oh, I've had my shipment detained, can you help? If no database had been established already, you would have to go to the countries and map the world's global cotton production. Luckily enough, we started on this better part of a decade ago. So testing turnaround times do not take a decade. They're a lot quicker because now we have that database in place. So we've mapped a significant portion of the world's global cotton production. And that's a farm level as well. And that's what enables us to give these actionable data-driven insights at a pretty quick turnaround time to our clients. We would obviously love to be in the position where, say, for example, a importer of record has their product detained, that we've already worked with them previously on a systematic program where we've already done tests at that particular supplier, that vendor, across that fabrication. There is a history of results. There is a high level of compliance at that supplier. All of that information can be added pretty much instantaneously if there is an issue at border, where they can proactively provide that. We can then support them in some of their remediation if they would like to do further investigation. But yeah, I hope that sort of tackles your part there, Lalo.
Can I just add something? Because I think, getting to Lalo's question, I think that where you're making that connection to the DNA, I think there is, kind of an interesting correlation, not exactly as you said, I'd like to get instantaneous results, but similar to DNA, if you have a vast reference library, you're going to be able to identify more accurately if you have a match, right? So similar to, like you were saying, if you have DNA for 1 million people, you're going to be able to more accurately find a match to the one that you're looking for. In the case of Oritain, as Ben has mentioned, they have hundreds of thousands of cotton samples, farm level cotton samples from over 90% of the world's cotton producing countries. The accuracy that they can get in their results, based on the isotopic testing and trace element analysis is very high, and with a very high level of confidence versus, another company who maybe has, a tenth or 1/100th of the number of samples that they have. They just don't have. I think the better example might be the pixels from your TV. You could see a lot of dots if you don't have a lot of pixels, but if you have, hundreds of thousands of pixels, then you have full clarity of what you're looking at and be able to more accurately identify what is and isn't in your product. Because I think what's important as well is to note that the government is expecting a very high level of, confidence in the tests that importers are using. Therefore, they just recently issued that guidance on isotopic testing because they want to make sure that it's not just like another certificate that somebody goes through a drive-through and gets a certificate that says your product doesn't have, any particular prohibited material in it. But if that result is at a 50 or 60% confidence level, that's really not at the same level of what the government is testing, and it's certainly not at the full due diligence of making sure that you have enough confidence that there isn't any prohibited prohibited materials in your product. So you're really almost spending money for no good reason, because whether or not your reports can actually be relied upon is questionable if you don't have a very high level of confidence in the science that's backing the results that you're getting.
Well, to that point, here's where I was thinking is that if I want to, again, establish a testing process in validating my products, I'm going to need to set up a meeting. So, Ben, I guess my question to you is, what should I do for our listeners here that say, hey, okay, yeah, this is something good? Again, I would have to say, folks, if you're looking at making travel plans internationally, as well as I do, that is an extremely expensive ordeal with one person, let alone 2 or 3 that are going. So if you can validate testing on a product, you still may need to make that international trip, but this is going to tell you where to look, if you will, based on the results. Now, saying that, I now want to host a meeting at my company for, I guess, to make it the most productive. What areas of the company should I have at that meeting for the initial discussion? I mean, obviously you got your compliance and probably your purchasing/sourcing, but who else would be productive in this realm for such a meeting?
Great question. We find chief merchants and some of the merchandising team really important because we want to work collaboratively with them to ensure that the implementation of the program also fits with their production timelines and that they're aware around how they're going to communicate the program across their supplier base. We, a large part of the time, have general counsels. They can be in-house, they can be outside counsel that we work with, many based here in DC. We obviously work closely with finance teams, and that's not only from sort of a budget perspective, but that's also to sort of highlight the importance that, hey, look, you might have a significant portion of your US driven revenue that's currently at risk. If you're not actively testing, then that maintains at risk and possibility of it being detained or possibility of being called into issues within the media around forced labor, and that becomes a significant component that they're looking at. CFOs are looking at that under the risk register, and they're having to report that back up into the board. So there is a number of different contact points, even sustainability teams, because yes, it might be priority number one, compliance, but how do we then build that into part of the sustainability function? Because a lot of their sustainability metrics are vastly backed on where the origin of the cotton's coming from. And if they're gathering all of that data and they say, okay, 60% of our cotton's actually from the US and we're drawing water usage and other sustainability backed metrics, but it actually happened not to be from the United States, that becomes an area of concern as well. So yeah, sustainability, merchandising, compliance, QA testing, and usually the financial org as well.
With that, that's quite a few different organizations. What I first off, folks, I mean, to Ben and Anna, I mean, you've heard, Anna, you've heard me say this, but I'm a big proponent of collaborating with a lot of areas. But Anna, this question may be more for you. I know what I would say in this, but with multiple organizations, especially from your experience being in multiple areas of the government, and you're trying to get different areas involved with different agencies, but it's similar to that in companies as well. Would you recommend finding an executive at some higher level to help sponsor this effort? Or otherwise, you're going to have a lot of folks at, maybe peer levels. It's almost like herding cats until there's somebody up there high enough to say, hey, this is what we're going to do. I mean, what would you recommend for somebody to pull all this together?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that awareness at the C-suite level is super important. One, Ben mentioned it's not only about the budgetary aspects, but the budgetary aspects of having a sufficiently robust risk management program for a large company is not going to be cheap. And so the number is going to be sufficient to bring in the interest of the C-suite. Having the general counsel is really important for a number of reasons. If, obviously being able to explain the legal aspects and the ramifications of not having, taken these extra steps. But usually the general counsel has direct access to the C-suite, and they would, in most cases, be able to communicate the importance of just come in and sit and listen to the beginning of, the rationale behind why this is a smart investment. Not only is it a smart investment to really police your procurement, it's a good investment in being able to show in your due diligence reporting, whether it's to different states that currently U.S. states that have strong reporting requirements, but also, other major markets like the EU that have very strong due diligence reporting, and even for creditor grading. So like how Dun & Bradstreet or Moody's or others are considering companies that are publicly traded. They really take a look at what their annual reports are, what their due diligence reports are, and the efforts that they're putting on exercising proper due diligence over their risk is super important from sustainability perspectives, and certainly from human rights and social responsibilities. And this goes a long way towards saying the company is investing in best-in-class testing. If you say that you're investing in using the cheapest testing you can find, that isn't a very serious approach at ensuring that you have, the best protection for your company.
Well, and taking it a step further, I mean, you've touched on a few things. General counsel, there's no question. They're going to have, like you said, the ear of the C-suite, especially if it's something that's like, here's a vulnerability, here's an efficient way of validating it, and actually, with all due respect to it, a much faster way. But then I can see the CFO or finance area really being involved in some of that, saying that, hey, how would you like to pay for testing instead of higher T&E or travel and entertainment costs? You still may have that. One of the areas, though, as you were talking, and it may be, again, under finance, it may be just depends on where the purchasing or sourcing group rolls up to. But as we're going through some of this, we've been talking like we're reacting or we already have products and we're trying to validate this. kind of after the fact. The other side of this is being preemptive in a sense on new products or new things. So the buyers that go out and travel all over the world, as they're looking at stuff, and they may be bringing back samples. Well, one of the things that would be ideal in this is, hey, this is what they're saying their product is. Let's test it real quick and see, are they, is it what the party is saying, and those kinds of things. Is it really puts you in a stronger position negotiating wise for our pricing as well as compliance. So, all right, I love all that. It's like, so you get going and when this, so let me just in general, if I have a garment that needs to be tested or something, is this thing going to cost me an arm and a leg, or is this a deal where you're doing it off of transaction-based testing or on a flat rate kind of a deal? What am I talking about here?
It can be pretty bespoke, and so we don't necessarily work on sort of an ad hoc testing program. We like to implement programs that are targeted, they're risk based, and they're reflective of that particular supply chain. So the programs can vary pretty sufficiently, pretty widely. And I would also mention that can be dependent upon the number of suppliers, the number of products you want to test, but we do look to find efficiencies as to where we're implementing testing. For example, we wouldn't necessarily test at a SKU level because a brand might have 2,000 different SKUs, but they might only have 200 different fabrications. If we're sort of focusing testing at the fabrication level, that can become really powerful. And then you're overlaying sort of spot check testing at more of the SKU level as sort of a checks and balance type process. So programs can very much depend, but we don't necessarily work on an ad hoc basis. We look to implement programs on an ongoing basis. And I'll mention a really interesting case study working with a very large retailer for a number of years now. First year of engagement, quite a high-ish non-compliance rate. And over a 3-year period, we've managed to reduce that down to a very low single digit. So that can really highlight the impacts and shift that they've had within the behavior of their supply chain. And that is a huge return on investment and cost saving. It's reduced a significant amount of risk in their supply chain. They're getting better data from their suppliers as well. Just to put some of the investment into context as well.
Yeah, and I think one other thing that I think is important to note is, Oritain is not interested in being somebody's whitewashing company, right? So somebody who just wants to let me just buy 3 tests from Oritain because then I can claim that I'm using Oritain to test my supply chain. That's not beneficial to Oritain. Oritain wants to be a contributor towards a healthy supply chain, not to give you some sort of a free pass. That's not in anybody's best interest. And so they are looking at being part of a solution, part of the compliance program for an importer or a brand, not necessarily just an ad hoc tester.
Well, and this is something where, quite frankly, this is like an ongoing, an enhancement to the company, really an enhancement to the compliance area, but it can touch on so many different areas of the company, especially as far as your products go. I just see it as, definitely a positive in looking at it. So the one thing is, if you're out there and you're in the midst of a problem, you're going to have to be that pooper scooper at the end of a parade, clean it up, do whatever. But what about your other products? What about other products from that same vendor? This is where you can step back and go, okay, let's take a smarter approach to this rather than reacting and cleaning it up. Let's figure out a better way to go. So if you're in the midst of a problem, this is it sounds like this would be a better way to ensure you don't have additional problems, or at least gives you a heads up that if you do have some risk, you're going to get a heads up notice on it potentially before it really hits the fan, if you will.
Yeah, and just on that as well, around sort of the investment, Yeah, it can tend to be driven by the brand and retailer because ultimately it's their product and name that's on the line. And in most instances, they are the importer of record. But it's been fascinating to see sort of the collaboration within the supply chain. Usually when we're sort of implementing programs for our clients, we then have a large number of their key vendors reach out and say, well, I want to also be proactive to manage my risk upstream. And I want to make sure that I'm maintaining business with you. You're one of my key clients. I need to make sure I'm meeting the compliance of your sourcing policy. And they then look into their supply chain and they test their fabric providers. They test their yarn spinners. And so we're really seeing that level of accountability shift within the supply chain. Yes, it is driven by brands and retailers, but it's been pretty fascinating to see that sort of overarching collaboration across many different points in the supply chain.
Well, with the results of your testing, here's another thing that I see that would be a strong positive. If in fact that you have a product and it turns out that it is completely compliant and 100% of what your expectations are, can you imagine then the position that your company can take as far as an aggressive marketing campaign and being able to get out there and tout whatever it is? It's like, Anna, you were talking about Egyptian cotton. It definitely, we've tested it, it's Egyptian cotton versus you're out there marketing that, and then one of your competitors or somebody else tests your product and comes back and goes, oh, no, they aren't. Here's the results. And you got egg on your face. So, I mean, I see a phenomenal stance of that. It gives you confidence in what you're selling.
Absolutely. And we work closely with one of those that's coming to mind is Supima. So they're sort of the brand representative for Echelon staple grown here in the United States, a lot of it on the West Coast. And their cotton trades on a premium because of the strength, length, and softness. And this isn't a plug for Supima, I promise. But their cotton trades at a premium. So being able to verify that is really important. And then we see a lot of that messaging being pulled through at the brand level because then they have comfort in the fact that they can communicate that, yes, we're committed to US cotton and we invest a lot in the quality of our fiber and we pay more for it and we can prove that becomes a really important piece as well. And we'll see that in a number of different cotton growths as well. But it's a great point that you make there, Andy.
Well, fantastic. I'll tell you what, there's more I would love to get into, but we're going to have to do this on a follow-up type scenario. I would love to see, a great scenario of a positive example and Ben of something where somebody was completely surprised and they went, but yet the testing went in there and what was done from that. I mean, Anna, this is one of those things where, obviously you've come to the other side of the table now in talking with clients and customers, whatever. I imagine there's been some big surprises, seeing it from a government perspective. Now you're on the other side and seeing this kind of enhanced, testing would be phenomenal for a private company, would it not?
Absolutely. I mean, I think when we first started taking a look at enforcement related to forced labor, and certainly once the rules started getting into some more geographic restrictions on where certain raw materials came from, it was very difficult to imagine how the private sector could protect itself. And the private sector was coming back saying, there's no way we can know. There's no way we're going to know. There's no way we're going to know. And then we ran into Oritain and found that there is a way that you could know. I mean, it's not necessarily free, but there is a way if you're a serious company with serious brand reputation, with serious, policies of compliance, that you incorporate, strict procurement policies and contracting policies to ensure that the raw materials that are going into your finished product are the ones that you are expecting. And that's true for food safety, for, I was talking about pharmaceuticals and things that go into people's bodies. It's super important. And is it going to maybe add a little bit more to your costs? Yeah, but you're going to be able to save a lot on detention costs, save a lot on, potentially other types of liability.
Well, and I have to say, I mean, investing in a testing regime is going to be more cost effective in the need to actually physically go out to some of these locations. But even if you do, and maybe the frequency of trips is cut down, so it's going to actually save you money. But when you do go out, you know what to look for. It's like, here's certain things of this or that, whatever the case may be, and you know what your commodity is. It's going to empower your staff to know and with the right questions to ask. I want to see, where are you getting your when you get your raw cotton in, let's say, for example. I want to see that process. I want to watch it. It's like, well, we're only getting a load today. Great. Let's go out and see it. I want to see the truck unloaded. I want to see the bale busted open. I want to see what you do. And as you're sitting there looking, you can look to see, oh, there's other bales over here. Well, let me just walk over and go ahead and grab a few samples and take back with me for testing purposes and stuff like that. So
just going to say on that point, we see a lot of this data being ingested as part of that vendor compliance and scorecarding sort of process as well. And then that can either put that vendor on maybe more of a higher sort of frequency for more audits or other documentation, or it could sort of incentivize better behaviors and less sort of oversight. So it can definitely have a positive impact there.
Folks, we're going to have the contact information out here with our show notes, but also, again, kind of recap. If you're going to pull together a group within your company to sit down and talk through this, you need to think through this ahead of time. So from a compliance standpoint, you need to be the one driving the bus on this one initially, but you need to put together some information and concise information if you're going to reach out and get the approval from your general counsel and or your finance CFO type folks, at least those two initially. There's other executives out there, but if you look at those two to get both of their approvals to move forward with this project and lay it out, you need to start writing and drafting up some information. Take a look at Oritain, take a look and reach out to Anna. If you've got a question, I'm going to tell you, she'll help you. But the point being is, if you're serious about this and you've got some questions, it isn't just going to be spoon-fed to you. You're going to have to take and help your company get over this hump and pull these things together. So I will say, Anna and Ben, it has been a pleasure talking with you. You guys are great. And this was a great topic.
Really appreciate your time.
Thanks for having us.
Well, thank you for coming on. And like Andy said, I think the next show will be more like, let's go into some examples or case studies or something without naming, I guess, without naming any names, and see, how your science confirm or debunk, something.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, even a session, maybe we've sort of given long presentations before for then someone at the end to go, oh, well, you're the CSI of cotton, and it saves everyone 45 minutes. But the science itself and the inception and the fact that it's been around for over 30 years, it's been used in some very weird and wonderful and wacky instances, whether it's homicides, ballistics, glass fragment identification, drug analysis. That wasn't where we found Anna, but there's some very super interesting instances that I think just from a understanding of isotopic testing as opposed to DNA and where that sits within forensic testing is just fascinating. Maybe I'm biased, maybe I've drunk from the Kool-Aid, but I think we should spend a little bit of time on that as well. But it's been an absolute pleasure connecting with you both, and privileged to be on the podcast.
Awesome. Well, thank you for coming.
All right, folks, listen again. Thank you for your listenership. Please subscribe, please follow, please share our show. Send the notes to us. Let us know if you like this, you don't like this, whatever. You think I'm full of beans, that one you can send to me as well. Anyway, y'all have a great day.
Thank you very much for joining us. Simply Trade is brought to you by the generous contributions of Global Training Center. You can follow the show and GTC on LinkedIn or Twitter and other social networks. Make sure you check out the show notes in the description for a full rundown of today's show with all the important links. Also, make sure that you share this with a friend and subscribe on your favorite streaming platform. We really like hearing from you. If you enjoyed the show, make sure to rate and review wherever you listen to this podcast. If you or someone you know would like to be a guest on the show or would like to sponsor Simply Trade or suggest any topic you would like for us to discuss, please contact us via email at simplytrade@globaltrainingcenter.com, or you can DM us on Twitter at simplytradepod. Thank you again for the privilege of your time. Happy trading. Simply Trade is not a law firm or an advisor. The topics and discussions conducted by Simply Trade hosts and guests should not be considered and is not intended to substitute legal advice. You should seek appropriate counsel for your own situations. These conversations and information are directed towards listeners in the United States for informational, educational, and entertainment purposes only and should not be substituted for legal advice. No listener or viewer of this podcast should act or refrain from acting on the basis of information on this podcast without first seeking legal advice from counsel. Information on this podcast may not be up to date depending on the time of publishing and the time of viewership. The content of this posting is provided as is. No representations are made that the content is error-free. The views expressed in or through this podcast are those of the individual speakers, not those of their respective employers or Global Training Center as a whole. All liability with respect to actions taken or not taken based on the contents of this podcast are hereby expressly disclaimed.